In 1935, a small group of economists sat in a room with slide rules and actuarial tables and tried to solve a problem nobody had ever solved before. How do you build a retirement system for an entire country and make the math hold up forever? They wrote formulas that assumed a certain number of young workers would always be paying in behind a smaller number of older workers taking money out. They built in cost of living adjustments. They set an age where benefits would start. They ran the numbers as far forward as anyone could reasonably project. And they believed the structure would balance itself indefinitely. For most of 90 years, it did. Then the population stopped cooperating with the model, and then on a specific Wednesday in July of 2026, that math problem stopped being theoretical. It became a live event happening inside tens of millions of bank accounts at the exact same moment. If your balance just moved today, you are looking at one half of a much bigger story. The other half is a proposal sitting in Washington right now that would place a permanent ceiling on how much any American could ever collect from a system they paid into for their entire working life. One half of this story is money landing in accounts this morning. The other half is a plan to freeze how high that money can ever climb again. Both are unfolding in the same news cycle, which almost never happens. And that overlap is exactly why the numbers matter more this week than they usually would. Let's start with what actually happened in your account, because the mechanics matter, and most coverage glosses right past them. Today is the second Wednesday of July. The Social Security Administration does not pay everyone on the same day. It splits the country into three groups based on birthday, a system it adopted back in 1997 once the number of beneficiaries grew too large to pay everyone at once. If you were born between the 1st and the 10th of your birth month, your payment lands on the second Wednesday, which is today. If your birthday falls between the 11th and the 20th, your payment arrives next Wednesday, the 15th. Birthdays after the 20th get paid on the fourth Wednesday, the 22nd. A separate group, people who started collecting before May of 1997 or who live outside the country or who receive supplemental security income alongside their retirement benefit, get paid on a fixed date near the start of the month, regardless of birthday. So this is not a single news event. It is three waves stacked across 3 weeks. Today is only the first of them. That matters, because everything explained in this video applies just as much to the person getting paid on the 15th and the 22nd as it does to the person whose deposit already cleared this morning. Now look at what actually lands in that deposit. Because the headline numbers you have probably seen floating around are true, but almost nobody qualifies for them. And understanding why is the first piece of context you need before the second half of this story makes any sense. For 2026, the Social Security Administration publishes 3 maximum monthly benefit figures depending on the age someone starts collecting. Claim at 62, the earliest possible age, and the ceiling is $2,969 a month. Claim at full retirement age, which is 67 for anyone born in 1960 or later, and the ceiling rises to $4,152 a month. Wait until 70, the latest age that earns any further credit, and the ceiling reaches $5,181 a month. That $5,181 figure is the number you have probably seen in headlines calling it a record high, and it is accurate. It is also almost never what an actual retiree receives. To hit that number, you need to have earned at or above the taxable maximum income for 35 separate years, and then delay collecting until your 70th birthday. In 2026, that taxable maximum is $184,500 a year, meaning you would need to have earned that much or more every single year for 35 years, with no gaps for job loss, career changes, caregiving, illness, or slow start out of college. Fewer than 1% of retirees actually clear that bar. The real average monthly benefit for a retired worker in 2026 sits closer to $2,071. That is not a typo, and it is not a smaller headline hiding somewhere. That is what the median retiree is actually living on, next to a maximum figure nearly 2.5 times higher that almost nobody reaches. So already, before we even get to the controversy, there's a gap between the number people see in the news and the number actually hitting their account. Keep that gap in mind, because it is about to become the single most important detail in the entire second half of this video. Here's where the story turns, and here's the part that is generating far more search traffic than the payment schedule alone. While today's checks were clearing, a Washington think tank called the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget was getting fresh national coverage for a proposal it published back in March, one that has been quietly gaining traction ever since and just resurfaced hard in mainstream reporting timed to this week's payment cycle. The proposal has a deliberately bland, almost bureaucratic name. They call it the 6-figure limit. What it would actually do is place a hard ceiling on the total Social Security benefit any household can ever collect in a year. Here is exactly how the mechanics work, because the details are more specific and more important than most headlines let on. Under the proposal, A married couple who both claim benefits at full retirement age would be capped at a combined $100,000 a year between them. A single retiree claiming at full retirement age would be capped at $50,000. The cap is not flat across every claiming age either. It moves with you. A couple who both wait until 70 to start collecting, the same delayed claiming strategy financial advisors have pushed for decades as the smart, disciplined move, would face a higher ceiling of $124,000, reflecting the delayed retirement credit they earned by waiting. A couple who claims early at 62, the earliest possible age, would face a lower ceiling of $70,000, reflecting the standard reduction for claiming ahead of schedule. Read those numbers again slowly because the framing matters. This is not a single flat $100,000 cap on every individual, the way it sometimes gets simplified in headlines and comment sections. It is a household-level ceiling that shifts with marital status and claiming age, built specifically around the small number of households currently capable of reaching six figures combined. So who actually reaches those numbers today? According to the think tank's own analysis, roughly 1 million individual beneficiaries currently collect $50,000 or more a year on their own record. When two people in that category are married to each other, their combined benefit crosses the six-figure line the proposal is targeting. That group represents under 2% of the 56 million Americans over 65 currently drawing Social Security. On paper, that sounds like a policy aimed squarely at a tiny sliver of high earners, and that is exactly how supporters of the plan are framing it. But here is the detail that changes the entire picture, and it is the reason this proposal deserves far more scrutiny than a simple tax, the rich headline suggests. The think tank's own paper acknowledges that this group is going to grow. Every year, cost of living adjustments push benefit checks upward across the board. Every year, more workers retire, having spent their careers earning at or above a taxable maximum that itself keeps climbing with wage growth. The $184,500 taxable maximum in 2026 was significantly lower a decade ago and will be significantly higher a decade from now. That means the population of households crossing the six-figure combined benefit line is not fixed at 2% forever. It is a threshold that more and more ordinary high-earning households will grow into over time. The same way income tax brackets quietly pull more people into higher rates as wages rise even when the brackets themselves do not change on paper. Financial writers have a name for that phenomenon in the tax world: bracket creep. This proposal builds the exact same mechanism directly into Social Security, which raises the real question buried underneath all the reassuring language about targeting only the wealthiest sliver of retirees, who actually earns at or above the taxable maximum for 35 straight years, and then delays claiming to maximize their benefit. Look at that profile honestly, and it is not hedge fund managers and heirs to family fortunes, because ultra-high earners well above the taxable maximum do not get any additional Social Security credit for income past that ceiling in the first place, meaning the program was never designed to reward billionaire-level income to begin with. The people who actually land in the crosshairs of this cap are dual-income professional couples, engineers, senior nurses, military officers who retired into a second high-earning career, small business owners who paid both the employer and employee share of payroll tax for decades, union tradespeople who worked consistent overtime for 35 years straight, people who did everything the system asked of them, maxed out their contributions every single year, followed the advice to delay claiming until 70 for the biggest possible check, and are now approaching that exact finish line just as the rules are being rewritten underneath them. That is not a population most people picture when they hear the phrase cap on the wealthiest retirees. That is a population of career maximizers who built their entire retirement plan around a specific, published formula, a formula the government itself has never before altered for benefits already accrued. And that brings us to why this proposal exists at all, because none of this is happening in a vacuum. It is a direct response to a number that has been sitting quietly in government reports for years and just got a fresh, harder deadline attached to it. Social Security draws from a trust fund that has been running a structural imbalance for over a decade, paying out more in benefits than it collects in dedicated payroll taxes each year, covering the difference by drawing down reserves built up in prior decades. Those reserves are not infinite. According to the most recent trustees report, released in June of 2026, the retirement portion of that trust fund is projected to be depleted in 2032. That is not a projection buried 3 decades out anymore. It is 6 years away. When it happens, the law does not allow the program to borrow to cover the shortfall. Benefits would be automatically reduced to match whatever revenue is still coming in through payroll taxes, because payroll tax collection does not stop even after the reserve runs dry. Based on current projections, that would mean the system could still pay roughly 78% of scheduled benefits, meaning a cut approaching a quarter of every check, delivered automatically with no vote required, the moment the reserve hits zero. sit with that for a second, because it is the actual engine driving every headline you're reading this week. Without any change at all, in 2032, every single Social Security recipient in the country, from the retiree collecting the average $2,071 a month to the household hitting the maximum, takes an automatic cut of roughly a quarter simply because the math ran out. The six-figure limit is being pitched as a way to soften or delay that cliff by trimming benefits at the very top of the distribution first. So the automatic, across-the-board cut hitting everyone else in 2032 is smaller, or arrives later, or both. According to the think tank's own modeling, done in partnership with an independent economist, an inflation-indexed version of the cap would close about 1/5 of the program's long-term funding gap. A version frozen at $100,000 for 20 years before switching to wage indexing would close a larger share, along with a bigger portion of the specific deficit projected for the fund's 75th year out. In dollar terms, estimates put the 10-year savings somewhere between $100 billion and $190 billion, depending on exactly how the cap is implemented and indexed going forward. Those are real numbers with a real, verifiable rationale behind them. This is not some conspiracy theory floating around social media. It is a formal white paper from a nonpartisan Washington think tank that specializes in federal budget analysis, and it has already picked up support from unexpected corners, including a major newspaper editorial board that argued a program originally built to prevent poverty in old age should not be paying six-figure annual benefits to the wealthiest households in American history. On the other side, senior advocacy organizations have pushed back hard, arguing that any cap or reduction, no matter how narrowly targeted, breaks a core promise the program has made since its founding, that what you pay in over a lifetime translates directly into what you get back. That tension between fixing a genuine 6-year countdown to insolvency and protecting a benefit formula people have organized entire careers and retirement plans around is where the story stops being a simple political football and becomes something structurally interesting. So let's step back and ask the question, most coverage of this proposal is skipping entirely. Why does a program built on such careful actuarial math in 1935 keep needing emergency patches every few decades in the first place? This is not the first time Social Security has faced a countdown clock this specific. In 1983, the program came within months of being unable to pay full benefits on schedule, a crisis serious enough that Congress convened a bipartisan commission to fix it under real-time pressure. That commission raised the full retirement age gradually from 65 towards 67, began taxing a portion of benefits for higher income retirees for the first time, and adjusted payroll tax rates. Those changes bought the program roughly 4 decades of stability. We are now standing at the tail end of that 4-decade patch, and the same underlying pressure that forced the 1983 fix has quietly rebuilt itself in the background the entire time. The pressure is demographic, not political, and it is almost embarrassingly simple to describe. In 1950, there were roughly 16 workers paying into the system for every one, retiree drawing benefits out of it. Longer lifespans, lower birth rates, and a large generation moving from the paying in column to the drawing out column all at once have collapsed that ratio dramatically over 70 years, and it keeps collapsing further every year. A pay-as-you-go system, where today's workers directly fund today's retirees rather than each generation funding a personal account of their own, works beautifully when the ratio of workers to retirees is wide and starts breaking down as that ratio narrows. This was not an unforeseeable accident. It is the exact scenario every honest actuarial projection has been quietly flagging for decades, arriving now on schedule. What makes this moment different from 1983 is not the underlying math, it is the proposed fix. In 1983, the solution was to ask everyone to wait a little longer and to tax benefits for the first time for higher earners, spreading the adjustment broadly across the entire system going forward for people who had not yet retired. The 6-figure limit proposal on the table right now works differently. It does not spread the adjustment broadly across everyone entering the system in the future. It targets a specific slice of people who are already deep into their working lives, in many cases already retired or 1 or 2 years from retiring, who built their entire financial plan around a formula the government itself published and never previously changed retroactively for benefits already substantially earned. That is the part of this story that deserves far more attention than it is getting, and it connects directly back to the strategy millions of Americans have been actively pursuing for years, without knowing it might not pay off the way they were told. For at least 2 decades, financial advisors, retirement planners, and government resources themselves have consistently pushed one specific piece of advice above almost every other Social Security strategy. Delay claiming as long as possible, ideally until 70, because each year you wait past full retirement age adds roughly 8% to your eventual monthly check, and that increase is permanent for life. It is one of the single most repeated pieces of retirement advice in the entire personal finance industry, backed by real math, And millions of Americans in their 50s and 60s have structured their entire retirement timeline around it, working extra years, drawing down savings first, deliberately postponing their filing date specifically to maximize that eventual number. Under the proposed cap, delaying to 70 still helps. The ceiling for a couple at that age does rise to $124,000 rather than staying flat at $100,000. But for any household already positioned to land near or above that number, the delayed retirement strategy they spent a decade planning around suddenly runs into an artificial ceiling that did not exist when they made that plan. The reward for waiting gets capped exactly at the point where it used to keep growing. For a household that built their entire drawdown strategy, their tax planning, their decision about when to sell a business or leave a final job around a specific published formula, watching that formula change shape in the final stretch is not a minor inconvenience. It is the exact kind of structural rug pull that erodes trust in the entire system for everyone watching it happen, regardless of whether their own household is anywhere near the number in question. And that erosion of trust may end up mattering more than the dollar figures themselves, because Social Security has always depended on something harder to measure than actuarial tables. It depends on nearly universal public confidence that paying in today guarantees a specific, predictable return decades from now. The moment that guarantee starts looking negotiable for one group, even a small one, every other group watching the news this week is forced to ask a quieter, more uncomfortable question. If the formula can change for them, what stops it from eventually changing for me too? Polling on this exact tension has been strikingly consistent for years. Large majorities of Americans across income levels say they are worried about the program's long-term solvency and want lawmakers to address it directly rather than kicking the decision further down the road. At the very same time, when asked whether they specifically support any plan that reduces the benefit formula in any way, even for the wealthiest recipients, support drops sharply. People want the math fixed. They just do not want to be the ones the fix lands on, and nobody currently in the workforce is fully certain which side of that line they will eventually end up on. Because the line itself is what is being redrawn right now, in real time, 6 years before the deadline hits. This is the pattern worth sitting with for a moment, because it is not unique to Social Security, and it is not unique to the United States. Almost every advanced economy that built a large pay-as-you-go retirement promise in the middle of the 20th century is now running into some version of the exact same math at the exact same time for the exact same demographic reasons, and reacting to it in strikingly similar ways. Consider what has already played out elsewhere over the last several years. France raised its national retirement age from 62 to 64, a change that triggered some of the largest sustained street protests the country had seen in decades, precisely because it altered a promise millions of workers had planned their entire careers around. The United Kingdom has spent years debating whether to weaken its own pension guarantee, a mechanism that automatically increases state pension payments each year, specifically because the guarantee has become more expensive to honor than originally projected as the population ages. Japan, further along this same demographic curve than almost any other developed nation, has been quietly adjusting its own pension formulas for years, while simultaneously trying to convince a shrinking working age population that the system will still be there when their turn comes. None of these countries are having identical conversations. The specific mechanisms differ, the political fights differ, the proposed caps and thresholds differ, but the underlying shape of the problem is the same everywhere it appears. A retirement promise, built during an era of wide worker-to-retiree ratios and rising birth rates, is now colliding with the opposite conditions: longer lifespans and shrinking birth rates. And every government running that kind of system eventually reaches a point where it has to either raise the money coming in, reduce the money going out, or push the deadline further into the future through partial fixes and hope demographic trends improve before the next countdown clock runs out. The United States is not experiencing something unusual this week. It is experiencing the exact same structural collision every comparable country reaches on its own version of the same clock, just with its own specific proposal, its own specific numbers, and its own specific 6-year deadline. So where does that leave the person whose account just updated this morning, or who is waiting for the 15th or the 22nd? Here is the most important thing to actually do with this information: separate from the politics of who is right about the cap itself. Go find out exactly where your own numbers sit inside this picture, because most people genuinely do not know, and the uncertainty itself is often worse than whatever the real answer turns out to be. The Social Security Administration maintains a free online account system where anyone can log in and see their actual personalized benefit estimate at every claiming age, 62, full retirement age, and 70, based on their real earnings history rather than the generic maximum figures that dominate headlines. For the overwhelming majority of people watching this, that number will land nowhere near the 6-figure household threshold this proposal targets. which means the specific cap being debated in Washington right now would never touch their check, even if it passed exactly as written today. Knowing that concretely, with your own real numbers in front of you, rather than a scary headline figure, is worth far more than any amount of general anxiety about a policy fight still working its way through committee rooms and think tank papers. For the smaller number of households who are on track to approach or cross that six-figure combined threshold, largely dual maximum earner couples planning to delay claiming until 70, this is the moment to actually run updated projections rather than relying on advice that was accurate 5 years ago. A claiming age decision that made perfect sense under the old uncapped formula might warrant a second look if a household's own projected numbers land close to where this proposal draws its lines, because the entire point of financial planning is adjusting to the rules that actually exist rather than the rules that used to exist or the rules being argued about on television. And for absolutely everyone, regardless of which side of any of these thresholds you land on, there is one piece of context worth carrying forward past this single news cycle. This proposal is one idea among several currently being floated to address the 2032 shortfall. It has not been voted on. It has not passed any committee. It exists right now as a widely discussed white paper with real political momentum behind it, not as enacted law. And Congress has a documented track record of taking years, sometimes over a decade, to act on proposals like this even when the underlying math is universally acknowledged as urgent. That does not mean it can be safely ignored. It means the responsible move is tracking it the way you would track any major pending decision that could affect your household's finances. Checking in as it moves through the process, rather than either panicking over a single headline or assuming it will simply disappear on its own. Here is the four-part shape this entire story has taken so far, and the shape worth watching as it continues to unfold over the coming months. The first part of the story is the one everyone already understands. A promise made in 1935, built on math that assumed a wide and stable ratio of workers to retirees, worked exactly as designed for most of the 20th century. The second part is the golden stretch nobody questioned while it lasted. Rising life expectancy and a large working age population kept the ratio wide enough that the system expanded benefits repeatedly for decades, without triggering a genuine crisis, right up through the 1983 reforms that patched the first real warning sign the program ever produced. The third part is where we have been quietly living for the last several years, without most people noticing, the patch era. The 1983 fixes bought roughly 4 decades of runway, and that runway is now closing, visible in trust fund reports and trustee projections that have been sitting in public documents for years, waiting for a specific deadline to finally force the conversation into the mainstream. The fourth part is happening right now this week, in real time, and it is the part where the shape of the eventual answer actually gets decided. Not through a single dramatic vote, but through exactly this kind of proposal, floated, debated, covered in the press, picked apart, revised, possibly abandoned in favor of some other mechanism entirely, over the next several years leading up to that 2032 deadline. Nobody currently knows which combination of fixes will actually get enacted. What is certain is that some combination will have to, because the automatic, across the board, cut that hits everyone if nothing happens at all is the one outcome every side of this debate agrees they want to avoid. That is genuinely different from a system quietly collapsing with nobody watching. This is a 6-year countdown playing out in full public view, with real proposals, real numbers, real political fights, and real opportunities for ordinary people to understand exactly what is being discussed before it gets decided, rather than finding out only after the fact. The 1935 designers could not have predicted the exact shape of 2026, but the system they built was always designed to be adjustable precisely because they understood, even then, that no set of assumptions holds perfectly for 90 years straight. So here is where this leaves you, sitting with a check that either already landed this morning or is still a week or two away. The immediate action is small and takes less time than this video did to watch. Log into your own Social Security account, look at your actual personalized numbers across all 3 claiming ages, and know precisely where you stand relative to every threshold discussed today, rather than relying on headline figures that apply to almost nobody. The longer-term action is just staying informed as this specific proposal, or whatever eventually replaces it, moves through the next several years of debate. Because the version of this story that actually gets enacted may look nothing like the version making headlines this week. And the only way to protect your own retirement plan is watching the actual mechanics as they change, rather than reacting only to the loudest headline in front of you. This video is intended as general information about a public policy proposal and current Social Security payment mechanics, not personalized financial, tax, or legal advice. Every household situation is different, and anyone with questions about how a specific proposal could affect their own retirement, Timeline should confirm their numbers directly through the Social Security Administration or speak with a qualified financial advisor before making any claiming decisions. The check that hit accounts today was calculated using a formula written most recently in 1983 and left largely untouched for over 40 years since. Whatever formula is being written into law right now to answer the questions raised this week will very likely be the one an entire new generation of retirees spends the next 4 decades planning their lives around. The same way the current generation has spent theirs planning around the version passed down from 1983. The only real question left is whether it gets written carefully in public with enough scrutiny to get the balance right, or whether it gets rushed through at the last possible moment in 2032 because nobody outside a handful of policy analysts was paying close enough attention while there was still time to shape it.